Your Humanities Half Hour is brought to you by the Northern Marianas Humanities Council.
Hafadays and Tiro, welcome to Your Humanities Half Hour. I'm Catherine Perry, and today it's my pleasure to have in studio a fellow journalist, multimedia journalist, Thomas Manglona. Thomas, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Catherine. So great to be here.
You know, I only met you a couple of weeks ago, but I have to say I'm really impressed with what you're doing with your career and wanted to give the community an opportunity to be kind of inspired by what you're doing. And one of the things that you've done in your young career is formed the Pacific Islander Journalism Task Force under the Asian American Journalists Association. That is a mouthful. What is this task force all about?
And so this task force was formed with the help of fellow people who call the Marianas home, Anita Hofschneider and Rachel Ramirez. And then we also got a great filmmaker who's has roots in Hawaii, Lauren Kawana. And we formed this task force just in the past year, really focused on three different things in the area of journalism. The first thing is the idea of increasing the amount of actual Pacific Islanders who are journalists across the nation. And the second thing that we're looking at is to also increase accurate coverage of Pacific Islander communities, whether that's in the Pacific or in the diaspora in the U.S. mainland. And the third approach is also looking at how we can diversify sources. And so when we look at stories that, whether or not they're related to Pacific Islander communities, if there's a Pacific Islander expert in that field, how do we get them to the front of the story or to be a source and expert cited in multiple stories, whether or not it's a Pacific Islander related issue?
Now, how did this task force come about? Were you guys like having a coffee one day, or really because just the fact that you realized there was a need for this? Well, what was the birth of this idea?
Well, it really started when I started college at UC Berkeley around 2016, and I've always been a member of the AAJA. I participated in their high school program called J-Camp, Journalism Camp, which was in Minneapolis at the time when I was a sophomore, I think, or junior. And I just noticed that the term AAPI often left out the Pacific Islander part of that term. And, you know, this is not anything new. I think a lot of folks who leave home and, you know, at home, surrounded by the community, surrounded by Chamorros Carolinians. And when you go to the States, you realize that, you know, you might be the only Pacific Islander in the room, if not part of just a small handful of them. And so when I saw their mission about, you know, wanting to cover AAPI communities, and I didn't really see Pacific Islander representation, I brought it to their attention. Of course, I was a freshman then, so, you know, I don't think I was really heard at the time. And then just throughout the years, talking to other journalists, I initially also reached out to Anita Hofschneider saying, hey, I think there's something more tangible here that we can do that is a concerted effort to increase, coverage of these issues, to support young students from the Marianas who also want to become journalists. Something that I feel growing up, there wasn't really any outlet to kind of go towards that field that was, you know, right in front of me. The great mentors, but no really official program to bring you into the field. And so it was really out of conversations with also Rachel Ramirez and then Lauren Kawana in California that we just decided to start it because, we advocated for it for a few months and through the local chapter in San Francisco. And we put together a proposal. We put together why it's needed, what has been done wrong in the past in terms of this representation. And the national board gave the green light. And now we are officially announced as of a few months ago to be, kind of that channel for any Pacific Islanders who want to express themselves or need support. And again, it's not a group of an authoritative voice as to this is what we need and what we want. We really are, forming the group as a terms for anyone to come and use it for their needs. And so that's the main goal there.
Kind of like facilitators.
Yes, definitely facilitators, and we're constantly trying to expand the network. And something that I'm also wanting to do is continue to connect local journalists in the Pacific to these national outlets and to these national stories. Because when things happen here that national outlets are looking to cover, there are journalists here who have the skills and have the mindset and the history and the cultural knowledge that no reporter coming in to kind of parachute journalism coverage their way in is going to be able to bring the same values. And so that's the ultimate goal. But, we're just getting started.
Exactly.
We've had a few meetings, but really I'm grateful to the national board for, allowing the Pacific Islander Task Force to take shape. And really, we're just letting it go into the community and seeing what the community wants to, do with it and shape it, because it's really that platform. We have our own goals and objectives as individuals, but it's a living group, and so we're always open to change for whatever we see the need to arise be.
Have you undertaken any specific initiatives in the last few months since you formed to kind of move your goals forward?
Sure. Our first initiative that really started even before the beginning of the task force was the Oceania Sources document, something that the Humanities Council helped disseminate, and we got a lot of people responding from the Humanities Council as well. And basically what that is, it's a database of Pacific Islander experts in the islands, in the states, who can just speak on a wide array of issues. And so far we have about 22 people on it, and that's great. But if you're listening and you have subject area or expert knowledge on something, we really do encourage you to sign up. So you can go ahead and find that on aaja.org, I believe, or Google Asian American Journalists Association Pacific Islander Journalism Task Force. And so that's one of the most tangible and kind of immediate things that we've done. And again, that is to serve as a database so that whether you're a national, regional, local reporter, and you say, okay, so there's an issue coming up with regards to COVID-19 and Pacific Islander issues, you can go into this database and look for a doctor who works with Pacific Islander communities or has Pacific Islander knowledge, and you can call them, their numbers there, their bios there, their resumes there. And so that's the database that we hope to roll out as well. And we're also going to pair that database with something that the national chapter is working on with the Speakers Bureau there. And so other efforts that we're working on too is having a presence at the annual convention. And so this August, it was supposed to be held at DC, but because of the pandemic, it's moved online. And so there we're going to be hosting 2 panels. The first panel, which will be moderated by Rachel Ramirez, is on reporting on Pacific Islander communities. It's a discussion on who Pacific Islander communities are and why covering them is important. And then the second panel, which will be moderated by Anita Hofschneider, is the panel on investigative reporting in the Pacific Islander communities. And so a lot of it is education and awareness, but we also want to have the engagement part and reach beyond any professional journalists and bring in anyone with any knowledge to, into the task force to possibly serve as a source or expert. Because we can talk a lot about how media has got it wrong, but we can also be part of the solution about how can we make sure they don't get it wrong. And that's by providing really reliable, credible sources who really care about our community.
So this database you mentioned, it almost sounds like anybody who has some level of knowledge or expertise in any field that's either they actually are a Pacific Islander or they're out here in the Pacific Islands, they could be a part of this database. Because you mentioned the doctor, and I was like, well, man, that opens up a lot of fields.
Yes, it's anyone who
a business person, yes, who has long experience doing business here. Wow.
Or even if you're a student with who's advocating for a specific issue, put your name in as well, because youth also help lead the way. But we really are expanding it. So far in the list, which will be made public soon, is we have local filmmakers from Saipan, we have indigenous scholars from Guam, we have some other experts from Hawaii and California and Utah and just across the nation, really. And so we hope to grow the list. But you're right, the qualification is you've got a voice, you've got some knowledge about the community, and you want to share that with someone, we want you to be on this database. So, and again, it's an opportunity just to share as much as we can about our communities, not just here at home, but for journalists who might be approaching Pacific Islander communities for the very first time in their coverage.
You seem quite galvanized to share what you've learned, your experience, your opportunities with others. I know you recently partnered with the Humanities Council on a workshop for local journalists. Tell us about that.
Yes, and so last year, Rachel Ramirez and I fortunately got a grant from the Humanities Council, and we were able to run a workshop called Journalism to Empower the Community, or to Empower Communities. And we had about 30 people show up, both journalists, students, and everyday residents who just had time and wanted to drop by. And we really just introduced some of the basic journalism 101 skills, including how to engage with media, how to send press releases, also how to record video and write script, and really just to create a media literacy, something that is outside of maybe a regular school curriculum. And so that went really well, and I think the Pacific Islander Journalism Task Force really is just also a larger part of that mission that we wanted to share. And, of the 4 founding members, 3 are from the Marianas, but we really are expansive and really invite people from Melanesia, Micronesia, Polynesia, and the diaspora to, share their stories and contact us.
Related to that, you are part of the ongoing series with the Humanities Council on racial equality and civil unrest. Your interview has yet to air, but it is coming up. And I know one of the things you mentioned there was the responsibility / opportunity for citizens to be a part of the journalism process, even if they themselves are not journalists. How does this work, and why do you feel it's important?
And something that we also mentioned in that interview is the idea of democratizing information and the process. Something I also shared last time was the idea that I've always felt media was this thing separate from me, this big entity kind of, in the void. It exists. Yeah, those people. And part of the mission of the task force, and also just in general, that the views I hold individually, is the idea that anyone who wants to get involved especially on a media platform, should be able to get involved. You shouldn't need lots of money to be able to get your perspective out there in a creative way, whether that's through print, video, or audio. That really, if that's your creative outlet, you should be able to do that without any restriction. And you should be able to also engage and challenge ideas in the ways that you find yourself comfortable with. And so that's kind of the motivation and intention behind wanting to, pull the veil back from the media as an institution. It's often called the fourth estate or the court of public opinion. Sounds scary, right? You wouldn't want to enter a court of public opinion, or any court from that matter. But it really is just about accessibility. And a lot of the work I do too, and something that I know you also do is using your phone to capture all types of media. And everyone's got a phone, if you're lucky, and that can take video. And I think once you have that, the world is unlocked to you, and you can really share perspectives in various ways. So,
well, when we come back, I want to talk to you a little bit more about your personal story. How's that sound?
Sure.
All right, we'll be back after this break.
The COVID-19 pandemic continues to impact our daily lives, including our cultural institutions and individuals who contribute to the humanities. The Northern Marianas Humanities Council is pleased to announce a new grant program to respond to the needs of nonprofit organizations and individual participants in the humanities who need support through this difficult time. The COVID-19 Relief Grant provides up to $15,000 to eligible organizations and up to $10,000 to eligible individuals. Visit the Northern Marianas Humanities Council website at www.nhcouncil.org/COVID-19 to learn more about this opportunity for relief. The Northern Marianas Humanities Council COVID-19 relief grants are made possible by funding from the U.S. Coronavirus Aid, Relief, and Economic Security, or CARES Act, and the National Endowment for the Humanities.
Welcome back to your Humanities Half Hour. Today we're speaking with multimedia journalist Thomas Manglona. Thomas, you're originally from Rhoda.
I am.
How did you get interested in media?
So,
or journalism specifically?
Right, and so I grew up in Rhoda, and I just never saw the experiences of the community reflected in media. We'd have things happen, and I never saw it on the 6 o'clock news or in the papers. And part of that is because it's what now I've learned to call a news desert, right? You don't have a reporter there, no newspaper or television station really is stationed there. There's great citizen journalism happening and great public information officers in the community. It's not completely abandoned, right?
Right.
But there is no kind of general storytelling narrative that is established in the sense of journalism. And so I got interested simply because I didn't see my community reflected, and I wanted to, change that a little bit. And I think just from the get-go, I bought a cheap recorder from a store in Rhoda. I think it was about $15. And I started covering my PTA meetings at my school. And I put it up on a blog that was called Luta Pago, Rhoda Today. And I realized that a lot of my friends' classmates were asking when the next kind of story was coming out, because apparently my friends' classmates, I was in middle school at the time.
Middle school?
I was around
Wow.
6th grade. And
wait, were you writing stories?
for my blog.
For your blog? Yeah. Okay, so you weren't just like recording it and putting it up.
No.
You were processing the information for the viewer. Wow.
I hope people don't look it up. I think it's still up, but
what was the name of that blog? Let's see.
I think it's Rhoda Today.
Okay.
And that started, and I really just started covering education.
Okay.
And PTA meetings, they might seem small to some people, but a lot of decisions are made there, for the school and for the community. And so I expanded and kind of covered more of the environmental news happening around with the Mariana's Crow on Rhoda, and the fruit bats, and as well. And really from there, it kind of just, took off, and I, became dedicated to put out one story a day when I was at the time. And, as I shared last time as well, I just always enjoyed waking up around 6 a.m. and watching Christiane Amanpour on CNN read the day's news. And she really is my, inspiration in this as well. Really a window to the world, right? Especially living on Rhoda. Seeing what is out there and what's happening, and how it does also affect the island. And so generally that's how I got started. And then when I came here for high school on scholarship at Mount Carmel School, after talking to now Dr. G, who called my Rhoda home.
Dr. Galvin Guerrero.
Yes, and Mount Carmel School. And, he invited me over on scholarship with speech and debate, and to be a student, and I was grateful for that. And I took my first journalism course at Mount Carmel School with Miss Keiko Yamagata. And after that, I met some folks at the Variety and got to contribute for them. And then later on moved over to the Sappan Tribune, and then moved over to the Pacific News Center. And then, throughout college, kind of finishing up with them, and now working at KUAM. Really just, I fell in love with the media community here. There's so many great people working in media who've been doing it for a long time, and I was grateful to be mentored by some of them, and continue to do this in the community. I really just love local journalism. I tried out regional news in San Francisco, and that for me did it. And I said, actually, I love the local reporting aspect of it.
Why is that?
Because for me, what happens down the street is just as big as whatever happens at the legislature. What happens down the street is just as big as what happens at City Hall. And I think that a story about a basketball court that has never been fixed in the past 10 years, and that youth there, have been wanting to play basketball and spend their time that way, that is such a huge story to tell. And so for me, really, it is, and kind of related to our conversation about, how the media's role is in social justice and community, is that we, shift our values and talk about the everyday person and the everyday experience, and how things in our community matter. And it really isn't just about talking heads on screen all the time,
It takes a certain type of person, I think, to be to like journalism and to be successful at it. What would you say is journalism's appeal to you?
That's a big question. I haven't really thought about it until now. and I think its appeal is that you're it's a megaphone of sorts. It's a microphone, not for the journalist, but it's a microphone for you to pass around your community. And I've always said I really hate the saying, giving voice to the voiceless.
You hate that saying?
I hate that saying.
Okay.
Because you are assuming that they're voiceless, when in the fact they're just not being heard, right? And so I always, at UC Berkeley as an undergraduate, I was running the campus TV station there, and I always started out our first day of training for mobile reporting about saying you're passing the mic. We're not so, as journalists, at least now, especially as a young journalist, you never are going into a community kind of saving them, and all of a sudden now that you're here, their stories matter, right? Their stories have always mattered. And so I think the appeal to me is being able to pass that mic and amplify voices. And so I think that's the heart of it for me.
I can totally relate to that, because I also believe that everybody has a story to tell, and it's not necessarily just because they're usually out there in the media or they're known or that their story is important. Everybody has an important story. What do you feel your experience, or how do you feel your experience as a journalist has influenced you as an individual person? And are there any particular experiences you've had that have affected you more than others, either positive or negative?
Yeah, I think, I'll start off with the negative so I can end on the positive. But I think some of the negative experiences that I'm also, especially during this time that I'm seeking guidance from older mentors, is mental health. And I think that this is a topic that, you've shed light on, thankfully, and that is starting to become a larger part of the conversation in a normalized way right here in our community, mental health. And I think just as a reporter as well, being inundated with information all the time and really being on the clock all the time, having to stay up to date on literally everything, right? Mm-hmm. I think that takes a toll mentally and emotionally, especially during COVID. I'll admit it, and I've talked to my friends as well in journalism, and there's the fatigue of it, but we know we can't be tired right now. We have to inform people about what's going on, but we also can't ignore our personal experiences of communicating this trauma and this desperation and this struggle and sacrifice that people are making. Obviously, it's not our experience, but we're also not trained therapists in a way, to handle all of the information we're hearing. And so that's, I wouldn't say a negative part, maybe more of a challenge and something that I know even the veteran journalists I speak with continue to talk about it, especially when you're covering crime all the time or, health all the time. It does take a toll. I think one of the positive experiences for me, though, has always been seeing people's experience change when the story comes out. And so whether that's, someone who has a bad experience with an institution or an office, and they come out to the media, and then their grievance is heard and solved, things like that. But also the small stories of telling again what's happening in your block. I just did a story for KOAM that I wrote today for Saturday's newscast, so you can find it there, about a little girl in Garapan who started a lemonade stand and gave free lemonade to a police officer for what the police officer has been doing for the community. And so, finding just even small glimpses of hope like that exist in the community. This young resident, Alana, was, out of school because of COVID and decided, I want to learn math, and I want to do that by having a lemonade stand. And so it's kind of also simple things like that really help connect us. And I think especially kind of covering regional news, also trying to connect the archipelago, right? Guam is just 30 or 40 minutes away, but it also feels like a world away for a lot of people, and vice versa for them here, and really across Micronesia, right? We're more connected than we know, and I think that journalism provides us is the catalyst to help us make those connections. And it's something that my professors have called imagined communities. And so it helps us in our head realize that our relationships are deeper than we think. And so I think that's one of the great things about it.
I want to ask you what your future goals are, because you've really already accomplished a lot, I think, in your short career. But before that, I'd like to know, what do you think has been your biggest success to date?
Oh, wow. Well, I have a lot to learn, you know. I really am still a student. I consider, you know, Dr. Galvin de Langura always tells, you know, is telling us that is really an inspiration for me to show how we are lifelong learners and we're always students. You know, I take all of it in total. I think recently being able to report here on Saipan, and I'm going to Rhoda soon and reporting on Rhoda for a regional network is really a highlight for me so far. I've always just wanted to connect our islands just a little more when it comes to media storytelling, and to have the chance to tell stories, local stories on a regional platform has been really awesome for me. Albeit that it's such a tough time, right? Also, with COVID-19, and the circumstances are showing us really the ugliest parts of our communities and what's wrong, but it's also showing us what's possible and what we can be and respond in what ways. And so I think I'm always just learning, and I'm always looking for more highlights and learning from the struggles. You know, it's a growth mindset. And Mark Rabago, one of my mentors and also at the Tribune, you know, told me something that I still carry on today. And he said, you're just as good as your last story. And I truly believe that, you know, journalists might have a story from 10 years ago that, you know, really was monumental for them or the community, but you are just as good as your last story. And I think that's not a swipe at anyone. I think it's really just a call to action to do more stories, right, that are good. And so I always keep that in my mind. A news cycle is short, right? When you go to bed, you wake up, it's a totally new you know, pages of headlines. But yeah.
You're going to Stanford as a graduate student in journalism. Congratulations.
Thank you. I'm a little nervous.
You'll be fine.
Yeah.
What else is on the horizon for you?
Well, I think continuing to expand the Pacific Islander Task Force, really expanding its reach and having more members, especially the veterans who've been doing journalism in the Pacific Islands, having them become a part of it. And I think for me, kind of looking way down the line, is I've always wanted to come home and live here for the rest of my life and do journalism here. I remember I was being interviewed for one of the scholarships that made me able to go to grad school this year. And the panelist during that interview said, so what's your goal? Do you, is the top for you CNN? And, you know, I mean, no one denies an offer from a network like that. But I also told the panelists that my version of CNN is home, that the top is home. Yeah. That I really see also people in this generation shifting our frameworks to not always necessarily want more in a U.S. mainland context, because we have all we need here. And so I think for me, coming home and being able to report more, create more community connections, and tell the stories here for whatever platform is the top for me. And so whatever that looks like is yet to be determined, but that is what I plan next, is to always come home and always try to bring more folks who might have lost hope in home back here to find hope again. And so that's what's on my mind.
Anything else you'd like to share before we go?
I always want to remind the community that they are in control of their story, and that they should, and if they're willing and able, to reach out to their media companies, whether that's to demand better, fair, more accurate coverage, or if that's to tell their own story, to really encourage a climate of honesty, of no fear of voicing your opinion. And so, and that goes for every community, wherever you're at. And so that's ultimately my hope, is that journalism is not the enemy of the people, that we are the people. So
part of the same story.
Part of the same story.
We've been chatting today with Thomas Manglona. He's a multimedia journalist and also co-founder of the Pacific Islander Journalism Task Force under the Asian American Journalists Association. Thomas, thanks so much for your time and your thoughts today.
Thank you, Catherine.
This has been your Humanities Half Hour. I'm Catherine Perry.
This program was supported by a We the People grant awarded to the Northern Marianas Humanities Council from the National Endowment for the Humanities. Any views, findings, conclusions, or recommendations expressed in this program are those of the participants and do not necessarily represent those of the National Endowment for the Humanities or the Northern Marianas Humanities Council.